Hello everybody, and welcome to the latest in a series of interviews from Skarn Associates. I'm Mark Fellows, co-founder and executive director at Skarn, and with me today I have James Spurgeon and Robert West from Sustained Value. Sustained Value is a specialist natural capital consultancy, and we're going to be talking about the topic of biodiversity and nature, how that plays out in decision making and reporting for mining companies. But before we get into that, just a quick reminder to please subscribe to our YouTube channel, look for me and my colleagues at Skarn Associates on LinkedIn, and please feel free to follow and connect with us. Just a reminder to everybody that today we're talking with James Spurgeon and Robert West of Sustained Value about nature and biodiversity. I'm Mark Fellows, Executive Director of Skarn Associates. So, Robert, can you talk us through the LEAP process? So that's LEAP for anybody who's not aware, and giving us an example of something that you've worked on in that process, please.
Yes, sure. So as mentioned, the LEAP process is part of the suite of materials developed by the TNFD. And it's an assessment framework that supports companies identifying and assessing their nature-related issues, so their dependencies, impacts, risks, and opportunities. LEAP stands for Locate, Evaluate, Assess, and Prepare. And we actually piloted at Sustained Value. We piloted the LEAP assessment framework back in 2023 for a multinational mining company, in particular one of their mining operations in Africa and the supporting infrastructure. We followed the whole process, so from locate to prepare. Locate is really about locating the interface with nature, and what we did in this particular case was mapping out the sites, the mining sites, as well as a railway and port on GIS, and identified the nearby ecosystems, and also did an assessment of the sensitivity of the site, so how sensitive they were in relation to biodiversity. This particular case, all of the sites were considered sensitive in relation to the TNFD criteria. Evaluate is about evaluating impacts and dependencies, and we use a number of different tools, mainly Encore, as well as some from WWF, in order to understand what the potential impacts and dependencies were for those particular operations. And then in terms of assess, we investigated how those impacts and dependencies might translate into risks and opportunities, and that involved stakeholder engagement with key members of staff in the operational team, as well as the environmental management team at the sites. And prepare is about preparing to respond and disclose. And part of that process, we developed recommendations for how to integrate the findings into their strategy, as well as what they would need to do in order to disclose on the information. So that's the LEAP approach. We also had a secondary phase of this project with the same company, but with their corporate environmental sustainability team, so at the group level. And that was around developing a high-level biodiversity strategy in order to support their CSRD preparation. So that process involved a site assessment of over 50 of their sites across the world, 50 that they had already screened, using a number of different online tools and data sets to understand the interface with nature and the potential risk and sensitivity of those sites. A benchmarking assessment, so we looked at how the company compared with other peer companies in the sector in terms of what they were doing on nature. Lots of stakeholder engagement with various different members of staff across the company's operations globally. And eventually, with that sort of assessment, we then developed the strategy. So that the strategy overall was a sort of 10 key actions split up into 5 different pillars and a roadmap to when they should be put in place. And a key part of that, so one of the pillars was engagement, so how the company should engage with, or the corporate level sustainability team should engage with the sites. And we developed a sort of 3-tier site engagement strategy. So those companies or the sites that were considered to be the highest risk had certain actions, certain necessities, requirements that the company should do in order to engage with those really sort of higher risk sites in their operations. Overall, these 2 projects, as well as some others in the interim, really helped to increase the awareness of nature and biodiversity in this company. We identified some key risks and opportunities at both in this operation in Africa as well as others, and overall really increased the willingness to act. We presented the results to the executive suite in this mining operation, and we really saw that moment of, oh wow, we sort of understand this as a really key issue, not just because of the global stats of what's happening in nature and biodiversity, but also on the ground, how it might be affecting their operations. So yeah, that hopefully helps to unpack these more technical acronyms. The nature space is a bit of a alphabet soup, as many people say.
So Robert, LEAP sounds complex and data hungry. What tools and resources are there out there to help mining companies deliver on this?
Sure. So indeed, I mean, complexity really does come with the territory when you're thinking about nature and biodiversity. Unlike climate, which is really measured by one single metric, carbon emissions, GHG emissions, nature is hugely complex and inherently localized. So in order for a company to really understand their nature-related issues, you need to understand not only the state of nature in the vicinity of the particular site that you're assessing, so the health of the nature, ecosystem integrity, fragmentation, composition, and also the species that are present, potential threatened and critically endangered species that might be present in that area, but also how the company is influencing or pressuring that state of nature, so that this is considered the drivers of nature loss. So things like their pollution, the resource use, etc., how they might be having a negative impact. And so yeah, complexity absolutely, but fortunately there are a number of guidance documents that have been released over the last few years to support companies with the LEAP approach. Not only the LEAP guidance from the TNFD, which is a hugely comprehensive document, there's also sector-specific guidance documents. So if the TNFD has a mining sector guidance to help mining companies specifically with the TNFD LEAP approach. James already mentioned a recent report by the World Economic Forum, which is really helpful as well in terms of nature-positive actions. There's also the Nature Positive Initiative, and they're developing a whole set of state of nature metrics. So a suite of metrics for how to understand that assessment of what health is the nature in, as well as a number of tools. So I mentioned earlier we use one called Encore. This is a great tool for sort of a high-level assessment, sector-specific assessment of impacts and dependencies across a whole range of different ecosystem services and the potential impacts that those operations might have. This is a free tool. There are others that are sort of subscription based, like IBAT, which is a very common tool used by a number of mining companies. A number of mining companies will already have subscriptions to this, and this has data on the species through the IUCN Red List, as well as something called the STAR metric, as well as really important information on key biodiversity areas, the World Protected Area database. So this all helps to understand this sort of interface with nature, what's going on in the specific space that we're working in. There are other private companies that have a lot of sort of public data sets, as well as their own analysis of data, such as GIST, that we have a partnership with as well. But it's also important to mention we have Sustained Value. We have our own tool, so it's called NIAT, the Nature Interface Assessment Tool, and this is a semi-automated geospatial tool that requires only the location of each company's sites. It doesn't matter how many they are; you just need the coordinates or the shapefile for the particular site. And it outputs a whole range of different information using public data sets around biodiversity intactness. This helps to understand ecosystem integrity. And overall, it's about an assessment of the sensitivity of those sites. So if a company is coming at this nature phase, quite an immature stage where they don't know a huge amount about what's going on with nature and biodiversity, this gives them just that sort of pulse check of, okay, what are we working with? Which sites should we focus on, and what should we do in terms of the engagement? As well as that, there's also a lot of existing data. So actually, a lot of, particularly mining companies, they're not starting at zero. Mining companies have to do a lot of environmental impact assessments and collect a lot of data through their monitoring in order to secure the permits for where they're working. A lot of that information does feed into the LEAP approach, and what we do at Sustain Value is review those reports and that data and look to see how it can feed into the LEAP approach and feed into the results. So yeah, that's good to know as well.
What sort of issues are companies currently reporting on in relation to biodiversity and nature, Robert?
Sure. So as mentioned, at the moment, there's no international reporting requirements, but many companies are engaging with the TNFD, so that most of the reporting is aligned with the TNFD framework. There are some mining companies, many companies have signed up as adopters, and there are several companies that have already published TNFD reports. So Teck Resources, Vale, Tata Steel have already published TNFD aligned reports aligned with the disclosure requirements. So what this shows is that nature is moving from not just a compliance checkbox. It's not just about doing the EIAs and the monitoring that required for the permits. It's signaling that nature and biodiversity is moving towards a strategic asset. It's something that the company really sees as valuable in this engagement. But these reports, they contain, so the TNFD framework has a whole range of qualitative disclosures around how the company is engaging with nature. So to what extent the executive suite engage with nature and consider nature-related issues, how they are managing the issues, what targets they've set, what metrics they're using to understand the materiality, as well as some quantitative metrics. So the TNFD has core metrics aligned with the ESRS, as mentioned earlier, so around sensitive locations, as well as those 5 drivers of nature loss, so the key impacts that the company might be having on nature. But it's important to note, so if any of the listeners have seen the TNFD framework and sort of seen this whole suite of core metrics, there are a lot of them and it can seem quite overwhelming. It's important to note that the expectation is absolutely not to disclose everything. It's not a tick box exercise. The most important thing is to get started, focus on what's most material and feasible, given the stage of maturity that the company is at with nature. This is really important to know, because otherwise companies can be overwhelmed and just not do anything because it seems too demanding. In addition to that, behind the scenes, there's also a lot going on that isn't being reported on. So the company that we worked with, we did this whole LEAP approach and developed the biodiversity strategy. A lot of companies are engaging without actually reporting on the results, and as mentioned previously, but that's because they see this as a strategic asset. It's foresight, it's awareness of what's coming, and working on it now before it becomes mandatory. Obviously, those that are reporting on it already, they have reputational benefits from being seen as a company that is already engaging with nature and biodiversity.
Thanks, Robert. James, what should we look out for in sustainability reporting in relation to biodiversity and nature? What are the red flags and what looks good?
Yeah, so this is really important, particularly to avoid greenwashing. I think I'll just pick out some of the really key things that I think is important to be included in these reports. So firstly is demonstrating that the company has actually fully considered the potentially material dependencies, impacts, risks, and opportunities. And if they can, to show that they've considered what's known as double materiality. So that's the materiality, both in terms of the impact to the business, but also potential impact to stakeholders. And that assessment really needs to be shown to have been undertaken based on the actual location of the operational sites and understanding the local context as well. It's also, having done that, it is great if companies can then clearly set out how they are planning on tackling those issues, whether it's some sort of plan or strategy for how they're going to be dealing with them, either sort of imminently or in the coming years. It's also important to identify and include potentially relevant quantitative information. So this is aligning metrics specifically with reporting requirements, in particular the TNFD. I think one other really key thing to include is for it to be shown that there's some relevant, realistic, and suitably ambitious targets that the company has set. Ideally, these should be based on science-based target network guidance and based around science. And there's a range of guidance out there on how to do that. And in particular, for mining companies, targets should be set around land use, water, and biodiversity. And so some companies have been doing this. It's worth pointing out that Anglo-American and Teck Resources have both got net positive biodiversity targets. So going beyond ICMM's no net loss for biodiversity at sites by closure completion. So that's a pretty impressive target, and that's one that I think a lot of companies are going to be encouraged to be setting. Another one is Teck Resources target of using seawater or low quality water for all of their operations by 2040. So rather than using fresh water that other stakeholders might be using. So those are the pretty strong and powerful targets, which are great to see. In terms of red flags, just a few points here. If any company reports, or mining company reports, that biodiversity is not material for them and they don't have to report it, that's highly likely to be unrealistic and not true. And if companies don't include dependencies in their assessments around materiality, again, that's something that is a big surprise and not appropriate. And if companies only consider single materiality, so just the impacts to the business, that's a little bit weak, and increasingly companies should be looking at that societal impact materiality as well. And if companies are not referring back to the main reporting standards and the key metrics that they're recommending, again, that's a little bit of a red flag to watch out for.
What are some of the main lessons that you've learned in doing this work?
Yeah, as mentioned earlier, so I've been involved in this space for mining companies for 20 years, working on a range of projects all around the world. And there's a number of very common lessons that we've learned from most of these projects. I think the critical one, obviously, is to help to demonstrate a compelling business case for the company to be targeted at the C-suite, but also other sort of key individuals. It's also important to understand what your competitors are doing, and that can feed into the business case as well. So if you select sort of a range of your peer companies to see what they're up to, but also look at some of the leading companies and identify what actions they're undertaking, that can then be really useful to help to focus what efforts you should be doing so that you're not left behind. Capacity building and training is really essential. It is a complex topic, and that capacity building needs to be spread across the business, involving different departments. And linking back to what was said earlier, mining companies are already doing a lot of great stuff on nature and biodiversity. So what's really important is bringing together those people that are acting sometimes in isolation, and they often don't get together with other people within the company to share what they're doing. So some of the workshops that we've held with a number of clients now has been invaluable, not only to help to sort of train them up and build their capacity, but also to identify some of the amazing work that some of the sites are doing in this space. And I think finally, it's a complicated topic, and so there's so much guidance out there. There's so many databases. There's so many tools. It can be highly confusing. So even for us, involved in doing this for decades, facing on it, it's a challenge. So if you can bring in people or tap into experts who know what they're doing, who can cut through the noise and really help to focus on what's important, you will save a lot of time and money. And it's great that companies are reaching out to appropriate experts, whether that's consultancies or NGOs or working together with other mining companies.
James, what practical actions do you recommend that mining companies should take?
Yeah, very good question, obviously. So key is really just to get started. Don't delay. But it's important to bear in mind that what you actually do depends on where your company is on its journey in this whole space and its overall business strategy in terms of whether you're wanting to be a leader or a fast follower, or further behind. Assessing the sort of dependencies, impacts, risks, and opportunities is critical. So probably a first starting point, if you've not done anything on this already, is just do a high level sort of top-down assessment of your different sites. Look at what are the main material impacts, dependencies, risks, and opportunities. Once you've identified the most critical sites, then you can focus down on some of those more high-risk sites and then do more detailed sort of site-level assessments. Or you could decide just to pilot sort of one or two particular sites, get your head around what's involved, and then work up from them. In addition, it's pretty important to identify who in your company or at the sites is going to be responsible and taking ownership for some of these activities, and to help to build their capacity. And as I mentioned already, yeah, undertaking a peer benchmarking exercise is really important to see what you should be doing and make sure you're not left behind. And then developing some form of nature or biodiversity roadmap or strategy with setting out actions, short, sort of medium, longer term, how you're going to address and resource what you need to do in the coming years is important. And then if you haven't already done so, begin to think about some targets you could realistically set and commit to and sort of by when, whether that's focused on biodiversity or water. Select a manageable set of relevant metrics that you can track over time, and then basically, yeah, start reporting on it. If you've not started already, just get started. No one's expected to report on everything all at once straight away. Just slowly over time build up what you're reporting to. But yeah, bear in mind these standards that are coming in and whether they are going to be compulsory, and obviously do your best to meet those. But yeah, good luck to all those companies involved. A lot to do, but well worth it.
James, Robert of Sustained Value, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation today. It's been absolutely fascinating, and I come away from it knowing much more than I did at the beginning, which is a good indicator. So thank you again. I'd like to encourage everybody watching the videos to please subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on LinkedIn. You will find a bunch of links below the video that will connect you to Skarn Associates and Sustained Value. Thank you.